Voodoo a ouvia e cai Satan.
Africa is changing, but with that change comes concern that the languages, cultures, and age-old beliefs that have held communities together could vanish as they try to move with the changing world. We go on a journey across the continent to find out just what is at stake for these communities. We visit the Himba, a semi-nomadic people in a fierce battle against encroaching modernity. For centuries, the Himba have maintained their traditional way of life in small villages like this one. Life appears simple here, but in recent years the community has become divided, with more and more young people choosing a life outside of the village walls. The start of a busy morning for the women of this Himba village as they begin their daily duties. This indigenous community has lived off the land for generations, closed off from modern society. But since Namibia's independence in the early 90s, a different lifestyle has begun to filter through.
They prepare the hares after 4 or 3 months when they see that the hair is getting old.
Owen Kataparo is a Himba man who grew up in the village. He's taken me back to Umuhoro to show me how his community is changing.
When these children get into the school, most of the children, they feel shame and they think other children, they are talking about them, that they are not looking so beautiful. And I've been also asking some of the Himba children, why you don't dress the same, your own traditional? They say, no, we don't look nice. But it is just because there is no one who is telling them how special they are.
The irony that he's in Western clothing is not lost on him. Now running his own business, Owen feels he needs to assimilate to fit in. He's a sign of success, a poster boy of what's possible.
A lot of boys, they leave the village and go down into the town to try to find a job. And some of the boys, they find jobs, and some of the boys, they don't find jobs. Then some of them, they decide to take alcohol. They end up abusing their life.
For those taking the leap, the closest town is Opuwo, an hour's drive away and the capital of this region. But this integration comes at a cost. The Himba are often the subject of ridicule. A spectacle to pick and prod. We are told this type of behavior is a common occurrence. But it doesn't concern Chief Nongaba. As the head of the village, you'd expect him to be fighting to hold on to the past, but instead he's preparing his children for a life outside of the village walls by sending them to school.
Yes, I don't want them to.
Why is that? But one of the chief's wives is worried that her people are simply not ready for that life. Still, some want a taste of this new world. One of the most popular places for the Himba is this bar. Here, they come to shed the responsibility of traditional living. In this world, it's everyone for themselves. Caught between the allure of modern life and a desire to save his traditional culture, people like Owen are left straddling both worlds.
It scares me a lot. I prefer to die before the tradition of my people finish. I have seen quite enough for the 15, 20 previous years when it changed step by step. But today I'm sure it is on the edge to fall.
A clash of two worlds, a culture at a crossroads, a people unprepared for an uncertain future. From a community at risk of losing its culture to one at risk of losing its voice. For some, language is more than the ability to communicate. Next, we meet the descendants of the San, South Africa's indigenous people. With just 3 fluent speakers of the ancient Ngu language left in the world, we ask, should dying languages be saved?
Katrina isu
A race against time. A language on the brink. Katrina Esau is one of the last 3 fluent speakers of Ngu. At 84, she and her older sisters are trying to preserve the language of their childhood, now acknowledged by the UN as severely at risk. Committed to this promise, Katrina has turned her house in the Northern Cape into a school. For a few hours a week, local children come here to learn the 112 distinct sounds and 45 different clicks of Ngu. Like many other African languages, it's been passed down orally through generations, and that has threatened its survival. To stop it being consigned to the history books, Katrina and her family have joined with linguists to create an alphabet and basic rules of grammar, the beginnings of a documented language. Omar Mate, as she is affectionately known here, is working hard to make sure that their language outlives them, but her reach is restricted to these walls. About 3 hours from here, though, another indigenous community is looking to modern means for the answer. Here in Springbok, Dina's radio show connects 70,000 Nama speakers across the continent. The era of apartheid left the Nama people splintered, and today Nama is not recognized as one of South Africa's 11 official languages.
The white men come in and they say, you don't speak Nama, because I don't understand that language. And my mother told me in Nama, Wasni, you must talk my language. And we have no power because we cannot fight him back. And there's the shame come in. You must speak Afrikaans a lot.
And to do away with that stigma, this community is now fighting back. William Peterson, leader of a new political party lobbying for the rights of the Khoisan, says they want their language to be made official.
We want it as a subject on the curriculum at schools. You cannot promote and preserve one language above another. It's a violation. And we are prepared to force the South African government now to make this an official language. They try to erase everything of us. We now, Western cultures are being enforced onto us now, you see, and we're not going to allow it.
As traditional societies fight to remain relevant in a modern world, what is it about language that makes it so critical to the survival of a culture?
If you don't have language, you don't have identity. That is what very important. Then you can say from that is a Nama, that one. But I'm talking in English to you, what am I? Am I an Englishman, am I Scottish, what am I? So I want everyone to recognize me as a Nama.
For these near-forgotten communities, the fight for language is the only way to preserve traditions and ancient knowledge which can only be shared in the words of those who lived here decades before. As we've seen, the Khoisan and the Himba are struggling to preserve their way of life. Here in Benin, voodoo is also a way of life. Across the world, it's considered a belief, but here, it's a religion, and it's thriving. Ouida, the home of voodoo. Rooted in the worship of nature and ancestors, it's celebrated across the world and is an official religion here in Benin. The world is changing and old traditions are often pushed out, but voodoo is thriving. This is the annual Tuplok Plok ritual, a cleansing ceremony. Devotees come together to communicate with their gods by singing, dancing, and making sacrifices. It's been a long day for the voodoo devotees who've been performing rituals since this morning. It's now 6 p.m. and this part of the ceremony is all about purification. This group are boiling rings, the type you wear on your finger, in the fresh blood of goats and chickens. They believe this process will bring protection to whoever wears the rings. Voodoo is often misunderstood because of what people have seen in horror movies. The high priest insists it's not harmful.
Voodoo aovia ekai Satan voodoo nu dagbe si biwe. Umede de bo ma juro lo bonado chi owenyo wenye ekpo.
Regine Romain, an academic, says this faith owes its bad reputation to prejudice.
I think the image of voodoo went wrong from the first encounter. It was misunderstood, misinterpreted by the early anthropologists and travelers to the continent of Africa. From that came a lot of xenophobic writing. But yet, as African people, we often invite others into our space of worship, but it's not often respected. Because we're open people, we're not afraid, we're not ashamed. But then the interpretations have not honored that space in which you were, many were invited to bear witness.
This is the door of no return. It was from this point that thousands of African slaves were sold off to work in the Americas. They left with nothing except their belief in voodoo, which they clung to as a reminder of home. And that's why it is as popular in New Orleans as it is here in Ouida. For many from the diaspora of West Africa, voodoo has become a connection to a neglected identity.
There's a shift in vibration. The younger generation want to loudly proclaim, be a part of the tradition in a way that the previous generations were more intimidated and more afraid.
And in the sacred forest on the edge of town, an ancient place of worship, the government has made a monument to remind the locals of their voodoo heritage. It's seen as a sign of their commitment to upholding the practice. The flaming pots are the climax of the ritual. The fire is believed to give followers a surge of power to face the year ahead. In a world where old traditions and cultures are often pushed out, voodoo is shining a light for traditional societies. For Africa's indigenous communities, the fight to remain relevant in a modern world is a fight for a shared identity, a personal identity, a sense of belonging, and therefore a legacy for future generations.